I think that we are on the verge of seeing some substantial, what I call accountability when it comes to provider performance, doctor performance. If you look at your networks in general today, they're very broad and almost everybody's in network, right? So
Yep.
where's the real value there? So the next question becomes, if you have an employee of your company and they're recommended from their PCP to go to a specialist, and maybe they need a surgery or they need to be treated for a particular condition, well, you're going to want to go to the very best performing doctor that's out there. So the next
Mhm.
question becomes, how do you identify that particular doctor? What I like to do is walk an employer through that process to say, here's how you can easily make available that information to your employees. And oh, by the way, here's how you can incentivize them at no cost, full reimbursement if they were to go to one of those top, say, 20% performing doctors. I think that's really cool. I've experienced it not only in my own healthcare journey many years ago, but also my family members. And I take those lessons learned to say, hey, how do we better off, because those employees are going to be in that real situation, and how do we help them identify the top performing doctors? And I think that all of the data, all of the technology is really coming to a head that's going to give that level of transparency and accountability.
Welcome to Benefits Broker Boost, the show that gives employee benefits brokers practical strategies to grow, scale, and streamline their business. Presented by PlanSight, where innovation meets efficiency in employee benefits. Now, let's dive in.
Welcome back to another episode of Benefits Broker Boost. I'm joined today by Matt Richard. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
If you're in the benefits space and you find yourself being stopped mid-scroll on LinkedIn by a whiteboard, that is Matt. That's his signature. We're going to talk about that a little bit, but Matt's done a really great job of creating scroll stopping content, which, as you know, when you're scrolling through LinkedIn is pretty difficult to do. So he's going to run us through some of his strategies he's using for marketing, and we're excited to get into that. Matt, anything else you wanted to share about yourself before we get going?
No, I was just going to say I appreciate you saying that, and got a little surprise for you.
Nice.
There's
I
your
love it.
whiteboard. You got
We'll
to
use
make it
we'll
official.
use that as
Point
the
at it, right?
caption, a thumbnail for the video.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, cool. Let's get started with your experience in the insurance space. You described it to me, and I think it'd be beneficial for everyone to know kind of your background. But where'd you get started, and how has your career evolved to where you are now?
Yes, been in the insurance industry for almost 22 years now. I like to joke with people that nobody goes to school to say when I grew up I want to be an insurance agent, right? But it's it's a really good career to get into, especially for those that really know their stuff and really are putting the client needs first. And you can do a lot of really good things for people and really help people out. So enjoyed it immensely. Back in the day, though, my father-in-law got me into the industry. He was an executive on the carrier side, and of course, when I was right out of college, newlywed and bright eye and bushy tail, just kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, he said, "Well, how about health insurance?" And kind of made some calls and made some connections, and better ever since. And so I spent the first 15 years of my career on the insurance carrier side, some of your large typical insurance companies. And that was really good. Worked my way up into national accounts, both as an account executive, and then also for a brief time was leading the national account teams for a couple states. And so just learned a lot. Learned a lot about some of your jumbo 75,000, 100,000 life accounts and different needs that they might have. But around that time, I'd always kind of wanted to switch over and give a try at the consultant side, because few in our industry can successfully jump from one side to the other. Most people kind of start in one area and sort of stay in that lane. And that opportunity happened in 2019 through a colleague that was running a office for a very large brokerage firm. Went over, did that, absolutely loved it, did that for 3 years. A small thing called COVID happened in between, which really changed of course, the office dynamics like it did for everybody. But during that time, I was able to learn about this emerging company that was grown by leaps and bounds through couple colleagues that had left and went over there, and that was really the first time that I heard about Aligned Insurance Services. Took a close look at them, and I was like, this is a pretty cool company. Heavy on entrepreneurial spirit, putting the client needs first, very robust as far as resources are concerned. 51% owned, which really drives the culture of the organization. And then early on in 2024, one thing led to the other, had the opportunity to come over to Align and been here ever since. And so grown by leaps and bounds and really happy to be here.
Awesome. Awesome. It gives you a unique perspective, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in crafting benefits packages for your clients, because you've been on both sides of the table. But I first want to talk about your LinkedIn post. I mentioned the whiteboard. You showed the whiteboard.
Yeah.
That's your caption. And when you see someone holding a whiteboard up, mid scroll, it stops me every time.
Right.
So, and you had mentioned to me in a call that sometimes people won't engage, but you'll be at a show and they'll be like, "Oh, I've seen your whiteboard content," right? So it's kind of become a signature for you, where like people know you as the whiteboard guy when you go to events. What inspired that format, and what kind of results have you seen from it?
Yeah, it's definitely been an evolutionary process. And I think that the general takeaway of the entire conversation is that if you were to look back at my LinkedIn profile in 2020, it was very basic. Never posted. I might have had a headshot photo. I'm not really sure. Definitely didn't have a built out profile section. Definitely didn't have recommendations or anything like that. And in 5 short years to where we are. So I would just encourage people to say, if I can do it, you can definitely jump on and do it as well. And it was really just a process of just putting yourself out there, starting to post on a regular basis, because that's really key. That's where the algorithm can kind of exponentially take off if you're posting regularly every week, and looking at the metrics and finding what works, what doesn't, right? And then kind of going from there and sort of tweaking things. And so the whiteboard kind of was a happy accident, as I like to call it. At the time, I didn't really have any unique video editing software, and it was just a way for me to kind of capture a hook or a theme for what my post was going to be about. And it was like, oh, I'll just use this whiteboard to kind of scribble on it and take a picture of myself and the hook or the post theme for that particular moment. And then from there, it just kind of took off. And so I would say that any still photo posts that I do are very intentional. The background's very intentional. It's a natural home office background. And I remember when the COVID shutdown first happened and I was working out of my home office, and for the first couple weeks or couple months, it was the natural background. And then I switched over to virtual, and a lot of my colleagues and clients said, "Hey, we love the natural background. We want to see it again." And so I went back to it. And I've even gotten comments when I'll be out at a trade show or something, and people will recognize me and be like, "Oh, you're the guy with the windows," and that they're talking about my LinkedIn posts. And so I said, "Okay, I'm gonna keep the natural background going." And then obviously the whiteboard to kind of scribble whatever the hook or the theme of my posts are going to be. Love taking selfies of my only because I want my LinkedIn connections and audience to start to develop that relationship and awareness of myself. And I will occasionally do a post that might have another picture, but it just doesn't tend to get as much traction or theme as doing a post of myself. And then last but not least, whenever I do a post, I like to wear one of my company's shirts that has the logo on it, right? Because subconsciously, I want people to start thinking about, well, yes, Matt, and Matt's an expert in all things health insurance, but he also works for Align, has this tremendous resources and bench and expertise that he can bring to the table.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think people might underestimate what you just shared. Your post is going to do better automatically because there's an image attached to it. And so what you see on LinkedIn, and I'm guilty of this, when I need an image to attach, I like go into Gemini. Gemini I find better for images than ChatGPT. So I say, here's my post, create an image for me. And it's not personal. It's not me. So they're not building a relationship with me, but you're doing both at the same time, right? You're getting a good image where they're seeing you, they're associating you with a company, and you're also helping your post do better just by having that image there. So I love that concept. Now, you've kind of mastered this, and you walked me through kind of your playbook for your LinkedIn post, and you've kind of mastered this scroll stopping where you've got your whiteboard branded material. What are some of the principles that you use to make those posts? You mentioned, you're looking at the statistics and you're changing them from the statistics, but
Yeah.
I notice you're never veering away and doing a post just for the statistics. So I want to talk about, how are you making your post stand out while still delivering the value in the vein that you're trying to deliver it in?
Yeah. So whenever I create a post, I like to start with a hook, right? And the hook could be the theme of the post. It could be a problem. Maybe it's a problem that I was dealing with that week with a client. And I was like, oh, that would make a good post insight to share with my LinkedIn network. And then from there, that's when I get into writing the actual content of the post, because once the person subconsciously sees the picture, right? So they're familiar with the window background, they're familiar with my face, they see the hook, that's going to get them to stop scrolling. And then they're going to say, oh, let me kind of read on. Now, the other key there is, once you get them to read on, it needs to be concise. You need to walk them through, think of it as you're taking them through a story, right? There's a problem, here's the solution, here's the end result. And it doesn't need to be long. It can be as simple as that. One of the things that I see a lot of time is people may write a post that is, they try to make it all encompassing, right? And so it's really long, and it's covering every conceivable scenario and every exception to the rule. You don't want to do that. You want your post to be clear, concise, and you really want to be picturing and speaking to that one person, that one prospect. Hey, here's what I want to share with you. Yes, there's an exception to everything that you might post or talk about, but in general, for that one person that you have in mind, if you write the post and you speak to them as an individual, you're going to get more success and more traction as a whole.
Yeah, I actually really love that advice. I'm guilty of trying to do the all-encompassing. I have ADHD. When something in the post that I'm writing reminds me of something else, I try to
Right.
include that whole something else, and it gets to be really long. I'm like, no, that's not the point of the post.
Yeah.
So I got to like rewind and really make sure, even though someone might be like, well, what about this scenario? It doesn't matter, right? Like, you get the point across that you're trying to get across. So really, really great points there. And this is great. Really, really enjoy what you're sharing here, and I think it's really valuable for anyone watching this. So, I think a lot of brokers struggle to build a personal brand. And you mentioned, if we looked at your profile in 2019, it was pretty blank. I am the same. And I tell people this, for years, I had this like belief that LinkedIn was really like a cesspool, basically. Like, I didn't want to go there because my relationship with LinkedIn, when I made a post about this, when something like this, I had a job, wasn't looking for a job, had a lot to do. I would log in, I'd accept like 20 friend or connection requests, from people I didn't know. And then I would end up with 20 messages from people that I didn't know trying to sell me something. And so that was my experience with LinkedIn, and it wasn't a good one. But
Right.
after intentionally using it to connect and weed some of those out that were just constantly trying to sell me things, it's become something where I've met really, really cool people through LinkedIn, made good connections, and I'm really starting to try to build that personal brand. So I think a lot of people struggle with that. If you use LinkedIn the wrong way, it's going to be a bad experience. But
Yeah.
what advice would you give to a broker that is just starting to post, and where should they begin?
I would say start out basic, evolve, but be consistent. And that's really what's key. You're not gonna boil the ocean all at once, right? Pick a certain lane, pick an area, and do that consistently, and then improve time over time over time. And before you know it, you'll see your reach really, really be exponential on LinkedIn. I've set basic goals for myself when it comes to posting. So what I like to say is, my goal is to post 2 to 3 times a week. Have 2 of those posts professional. I give business insights, give value. I want my audience to see like, oh, you know what, this is really helpful. I didn't think about that. Let me take that back to my employee benefit program. But then the other post is personal, and that is intentional because I want to develop that relationship with my audience so that people see and realize that Matt's the whole person, right? I mean, from obviously 8 to 5, Matt does health insurance, employee benefit consulting, but he's got a whole nother life outside of that. You know, he's married to Chrissy, and they have 4 amazing kids together, and it's 100 miles an hour outside of work. And so I will also kind of share and post stuff about that. I think that in general, I would kind of push back on the perception that if you post something personal on LinkedIn, that's not professional. I think you can be authentic. I think you can share personal information and still do it in a very professional way. And so the litmus test that I like to use is that imagine that I was at the water cooler in the office, right? Would I be comfortable sharing whatever I'm thinking of sharing on a personal basis there? If the answer is yes, go ahead and post it and share it. If the answer is no, or maybe you think twice, well, you probably don't want to share that information. And it can be as simple as that. The other way that I like to think about LinkedIn is it's an incredibly large virtual office space, right? I mean, there's over 1 billion users right now on LinkedIn. But when all you do is you have a very limited profile, you don't ever post other than you might be just reposting your company posts. It's almost similar to that situation where an employee just comes into the office, goes right into their office, closes the door, and then every now and then they're going to open the door and hand out the office memo amongst the employees. Well, after a short while, the employees are going to be like, I don't know what's going on with this colleague, but I'm going to kind of tune it out, right? And so I sort of see that correlation where if all you're doing on LinkedIn posts is just repost, it's kind of running into a similar dynamic. You're not going to see traction. You're not going to see engagement. You're not going to see a following increase exponentially.
Yeah, that's a great parallel to make, and I'll bring a case in point into this. Is you talked about, you know, maybe how you're looking at posting the things, the way that you're structuring it. Once you've figured out that structure, it's great. You know, you're going to get some engagement there, but you don't want it to be like, oh, I just opened my door or made an announcement to the company. You also need to make sure that people that you're trying to engage with, the people that you're trying to educate, the people that you're trying to interact with, you're actually purposefully interacting with them, right? Make sure that you've added your audience as connections so they see your posts. Make sure that you're interacting with them in a genuine way when they post and they post something interesting. You know, I think I started to see all of your posts when I saw a post from you about the Bengals and when Joe Burrows got injured and Joe Flacco was coming in. And I think I commented, you know, I'm sorry about your Bengals. Hopefully he can limp it along until Joe Burrows gets back. And after that point, I started seeing, you know, all of your posts basically because we had that interaction. So don't underestimate making sure that you're connected with your audience and also making sure that you're interacting with your audience in the right way. I think the way that you've structured the concept of how you post is really, really thoughtful. I like what you said, don't share something that you wouldn't share around the water cooler. And that's a really great litmus test, I think. It lets you be vulnerable enough and personal enough, but not like too personal.
Right.
Great. Really, really great information so far. I want to do a little shift into how you work with clients. We talked about how you've been on both sides of the table, right? You've been a broker and you've been in different positions with the carrier. So how has your time on the carrier side shaped the way that you structure benefits and specifically the strategies that you use with clients to make sure that you're putting them in the best position possible?
Yeah. I'm going to kind of answer that twofold. First and foremost, having an awareness and an understanding of how things work on the carrier side allows you to, in my opinion, better negotiate and on behalf of your clients and represent their needs and get things done, get results done. Just a couple weeks ago, I had a client, they asked me, it was a new client, and they said, hey, in previous years during renewal seasons, we've been told this from our broker. what do they mean by that? Be able to kind of dive and say, well, here's what's going on, right? You have the underwriter and they have a certain amount of business and they're trying to renew this business. And so they're going to select a certain percentage and push out a, what they call a no shop renewal. And I was kind of able to walk them through those dynamics to say, this is what you want to do in that situation, or this will be to the betterment of your particular needs, right? But it's just that awareness on the insurance carrier side to understand the inner workings to be able to maximize the outcome on the client's behalf. The other area that I sort of I look at quizzically, I guess you would say, is that those that they're just constantly bashing or talking negative about the insurance companies. And I get it. I get it. At the end of the day, costs are increasing. We're seeing profits on a crazy level, so on and so forth. However, when it comes to your insurance account teams, those are not the people that have the ability to dictate those outcomes. And so I sort of look at that situation to say, I want to stay very close to those people because I want to develop those relationships. Because when the time comes that I need an exception, right, or I need them to get certain things done on my client's behalf, then I'm able to call on them and leverage that relationship and get those outcomes. Versus the ones that they hardly ever talk to those on the carrier side. When the time comes to ask for an exception, you're going to hear probably crickets. You're not going to be able to get things done. And so I guess the old saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer, right? And not that I would necessarily want to pinpoint them as the enemy, but I sort of look at that as to say, I want to develop those relationships, and anyone that's out there on the employee benefit space, to a certain degree, to a reasonable degree, you want your broker to be closely aligned with and engaged with those particular individuals on the insurance carrier side to get the best outcomes and best represent your needs.
Yeah, that's a great point. You mentioned there is a lot of like us versus them, but having that relationship with them and having it be a strategy between everyone is going to be ultimately a better outcome, even though you might be unhappy with the things that are happening inside the company that you're working with. Yeah, that's great advice. You
Yeah.
scratched the surface here just barely in this question, but I want to talk strategy. When you're
Yep.
putting together a benefits package for a client, what is your process for balancing cost, coverage, employee satisfaction, and how does that play into retention with your clients?
So I like to start at the macro level, and then that will allow us year by year to identify various needs. And so I just went through this exercise with a new client that I started working with a couple weeks ago. In general, outside of your payroll expenses, your second highest expense for a company is probably your employee benefits plan, right? So then, in my opinion, that's imperative that we first and foremost have a discussion. We set what I call guiding principles. Typically, that will align with your company's visions, goals, and objectives. There's no right or wrong answer. Every situation is unique to that particular company. But I think it's worth a conversation to say, what do you want your benefit plan to achieve year over year? How does that align with your company objectives? And then that is also going to help us dictate how we're going to make benefit decisions as we go on. That's first and foremost. The second part that I like to do is to set a multi-year strategy. It doesn't need to be anything elaborate, but if you were to ask any business owner, what's your multi-year strategy for any other perceivable part of their industry, they could tell you automatically what that is. Yet you would be surprised how many people are more just reactionary every single renewal year to their employee benefit program. Well, let's have a conversation to set a multi-year strategy. Maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 3 years, but where is it today? Where do we want it to go? How are we going to have this align with your company vision, goals, and objectives? That's our guiding principle. And then once we start that process, we're not going to be surprised on any given renewal season, right? Because we know where we are and where we want to go. And it's really just as simple as that.
Yeah, that's great advice. Starting with the company and their goals. What's interesting, I've been on the other side of that as an employee for that. I haven't been in the benefits space my whole career. I've been at a lot of different tech companies, and I've seen different strategies for benefits packages. And I was thinking as you were saying that, I don't think I've ever been asked directly, what would your ideal benefits package look like? What would you like to see? And I don't think they've done that as kind of a survey to the company. What other benefits would you like to see? I can definitely pinpoint companies where the benefits that the company offered were a huge factor in retention, a huge factor in people's overall satisfaction. But I love starting with that strategy and having it be a multi-year strategy. What are we trying to accomplish over the next 3 years? Really, really great points there. Okay, so data and storytelling. So my background, actually graduated in accounting. I have a finance background. Data is second nature to me. You put data in front of me and I am really happy. I'm gonna find some fun things with it. But storytelling and data clash in this industry a lot. But I notice in your posts, you're doing a really good job of balancing those. You're using data, but also telling the story along with that data. And when you can do that right, you simplify complex concepts. What is your thought process around doing that when you're crafting data into your story in your posts?
Right.
How are you simplifying those concepts for your clients and prospects?
So I always like to say that the data is the foundation and the driver for the story. That could be the problem, the process, the outcome, all of that combined. And if you start from that avenue, and this might have started back when I was an account executive on the national accounts side, right? Because we're literally pouring over thousands, hundreds of thousands of different claim data points to scour it and say, okay, what's the data telling us? What's the story? What should we focus on to maximize the outcome on behalf of the client? And so the data is always going to be that foundational driver for the story. I think where a lot of people might get hung up is when they sort of go in with some preconceived notions to say, well, we're going to tell this and we're going to make the data align to that. That's not necessarily the case. You need to give a healthy look at what are we seeing, right? What are we seeing from an overall claims perspective for that particular employee population based upon that data? Then we're going to make our recommendations and insights.
Yeah, that's great. I've been in both situations where it's how do we make the data fit the narrative, or how do we use this data to tell the story, and it's two different stories for sure. Okay, so let's talk just overall industry. What are the trends and changes that you're seeing right now in the employee benefits space that you feel like brokers should be paying closer attention to?
As I look at 2026 and beyond, I really think that innovation is going to be at the forefront. I think there is a lot of areas historically in the past, if we go back, 10 years, 20 years, pre-ACA, so on and so forth, that there is a lot of room for error in the margin, so to speak, where you might be able to get away just on a pure relationship basis. We got dinged with a higher renewal, but let's just renew and go on from there. Those days are long gone because, as we talked about previously, your second highest expense is probably your employee benefit program. First and foremost, it's going to be what innovation, what cost containment strategies can my broker provide and bring to the table so that we can still provide a great benefit for our employees, but it's going to align with our business. And so I sort of see that as a separation between those that get that and are always going to stay and always learning new concept and new ways to improve and provide better value to their clients. And then those that are just going to try the tried and true old ways, but it's not going to work anymore.
Yeah. I look at that from a broader perspective. You're absolutely right there. But I even go outside of that and say employers and employees are going to be putting more and more pressure on their brokers as the next few years come. And I see that, I'm involved in a lot of investing in early stage companies. Valuations have decreased, right? So when people go to raise capital is more expensive than it's been historically. Right now, interest rates are a little bit higher. Multiples that people are getting on the company valuations are lower. than they have been over the past 5 years. And what that means is more and more businesses are being forced to operate profitably or as close to profitability as possible because it's becoming more and more difficult to raise that extra money. So they're looking at all of these line items. And when that increase comes, it's no longer, oh, we'll just raise more money in 5 years at a 20 multiple, right? That stage happened in the market and it's not happening anymore. So now the question comes back to the broker. What what caused this, right? How do we not have this? So there's going to be more and more of those questions, especially if that market dynamic doesn't shift. That's going to stay in place until that market dynamic shifts again. So I like that you're focusing on that. And how do we have those conversations? How do we cost contain? How do we win strategically with our clients? That's definitely going to be catching a lot of attention of brokers. It is this year, I know already, because we've seen really, really high renewal rates. But I think over the next few years, we'll continue to see that. Great answer there. Okay. Two more questions about social media. I'm going to combine them because we're kind of running up on time. But social media can be a long game, right? It can be, you're posting for 6 months before you get any sort of business from it. It can take a little while to build an audience, to build a reputation. And I think the reason that you've been successful at it is because before you started doing this, you put a lot of thought into how you were educating your audience. So for you, every post is about educating that potential person that might be scrolling and not interacting and seeing your posts. So when you're doing that, you're looking for the most engagement. You're trying to get the most out of your posts. How are you deciding on the topics you want to cover? Is it what you saw that day with a client? Is it planned themes in advance? How do you keep yourself consistent when it is this long game?
In general, my posts tend to be very fluid and on a week in, week out basis. And it's more just real time. Okay, just dealt with this issue with a client. Here's how we solve for it. So I might post about that. And that's where I find the most value out of there. The one exception to that is I'm also finding that, especially when you work for a company that might post a white paper, right, about a different theme. For example, we've recently posted about benefit communication for open enrollment. I think a lot of us on LinkedIn will make the error of we're just going to repost that. Here's the link. Anybody's interested, and then be done with it. Well, if you actually break apart that guide, you can end up with maybe 8 or 12 different individual posts. Because what you're doing is you're breaking it out section by section. You're taking a little snippet, giving your perspective, sharing your insights on that, still linking to that particular white paper resource. And now you're walking your audience through really this just great content. And so I guess that would be one of my areas to say to folks that are looking at that is don't just repost it and gloss over it. Really digest that content and think about breaking it out into individual pieces, because you're going to get a lot of posts and a lot of traction out of that.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I see that the same way that you do, right? You've got, when you work for a large, and I've been part of that on the marketing team, putting together those white papers. And sometimes when you deliver them to the rest of the company, they post it in one, hey, here's this white paper, right? Like we expect them to go read the whole thing. But I like that, pulling out the bits and pieces you think your audience is going to be interested in and turning those into their separate posts. And that's really, really great advice and gets you more posts overall, right?
Yeah, 100%. The other really cool thing, and once you're starting to get on a regular basis and you're posting real meaningful content, right? I don't think a lot of people realize that you can go back to that post. You can copy the link to that post and you can share that link in an email or in a text. And I've actually used that in my network interactions or maybe an interaction with a client or a prospect to say, oh, you had a question off of whatever theme of the benefit industry. Well, here's a post that I did last month around that. I hope that you can find it beneficial. And so you're able to kind of create that exponential expertise because you're saving time. You don't have to regurgitate everything that you might have said in that post. But at the same time, it's giving greater value so that that particular client is realizing, hey, Matt was already thinking about this last month. This is really helpful.
Yeah, lends a lot of credibility, right? When they have a question and you're like, oh, I answered this 6 months ago, right? That's awesome. Okay, let's wrap this up. First of all, appreciate all of the answers here. There's a lot of really good value for brokers who are trying to get going in the LinkedIn space and really figure out their content strategy and post things that are meaningful and build an engaged audience. So I appreciate you sharing so freely with us. But I love wrapping these up with the question of outlook, right? What has you most excited about being in the employee benefit space in 2025, almost 2026? That's crazy. Right now.
I when I look heading into next year, there are tremendous pressures on the industry, right? Especially
Mhm.
cost pressures on the industry. But what's going to come of that is really kind of twofold. That's going to drive a lot of really great innovation. So that goes back to my previous comments. Always stay curious, always stay learning, always be that expert, because you don't know when the next great innovation is going to happen. And then you want to be front and center to share that with your clients. But then a secondary part is that this is going to be the time where it's going to separate those that maybe don't know their A, B, and C's, right, as they should, and they've kind of rested on their laurels in the past, and those that really do know the health insurance dynamics inside and out and are able to provide that guidance and expertise. And it's really going to separate the two going forward. The last but not least, I'm really excited, and I've dedicated a lot of my posts this year to this. I think that we are on the verge of seeing some substantial, what I call accountability when it comes to provider performance, doctor performance. If you look at your networks in general today, they're very broad and almost everybody's in network, right? So where's the real value there? So the next question becomes, if you have an employee of your company and they're recommended from their PCP to go to a specialist, and maybe they need a surgery or they need to be treated for a particular condition, well, you're going to want to go to the very best performing doctor that's out there. So the next question becomes, how do you identify that particular doctor? What I like to do is walk an employer through that process to say, here's how you can easily make available that information to your employees. And oh, by the way, here's how you can incentivize them at no cost, full reimbursement, if they were to go to one of those top, say, 20% performing doctors. I think that's really cool. I've experienced it not only in my own healthcare journey many years ago, but also my family members. And I take those lessons learned to say, hey, how do we better off, because those employees are going to be in that real situation, and how do we help them identify the top performing doctors? And I think that all of the data, all of the technology is really coming to a head that's going to give that level of transparency and accountability.
Yeah, I've seen your post about that. Well, that's actually that is how we first engaged, was that post and then on the Bengals one. But
Yeah.
I have seen those posts, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think this is kind of a again a combination of those external pressures that we're seeing, right? Is that employees are going to start demanding more of their benefits as well, right? We've gotten to a place as almost an entire nation where a lot of people are functionally uninsured unless you're very wealthy and you don't care about a $6,000 deductible or a $12,000 deductible. You know, if you're early in your career, and that can be pretty devastating to have to cover something that is to that level. So I think employees are going to get to a point where they start demanding more of their health insurance as well, which then puts the pressure on the employer, which then comes back to the broker and causes
Yep.
them to need to get more strategic. But that's going to be, I know that's going to be really valuable. And the reason that I know that is I come from the dental space. I've owned a dental practice. I've consulted with hundreds of dental practices, and I've been in the space prior to this for over a decade. And all of my friends, when they're looking for a dentist or when they've got a root canal that needs to be done, or when they need to get a dental implant, they come to me because they're looking for that
Right.
information that's not available to them. And they know
Yeah.
I'll know 45 dentists in the area, right? So they're like, who do I need to go to for this? And I'm happy to help them there. But when we can start getting that built into what brokers are offering to employers, that's going to be hugely valuable. So
Yeah.
that's
And the way that the system works today is that you're gonna start by going to your PCP, right? And then they're going to say, hey, I'm going to refer you over to a specialist. Almost 100% of the time, that referral is going to be whomever is accepting new patients within the same network. But there is no rhyme or reason as far as, is that truly the best doctor for your particular situation in that geography? And so people are hungry to say, how do I know? How can I go somewhere else? And when you can provide them that access and that amount of clear insights, they jump all over that, because when it comes to healthcare, we want the best outcomes.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Matt, thank you again for all of the wisdom and for your time. This has been another episode of Benefits Broker Boost. Thank you for joining us. I hope that you got something that you can take and implement tomorrow in your business. Matt, how's the best way for someone to connect with you if they want to get connected?
They are always welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn and connect with me that way. I actually put in my contact information on LinkedIn, my cell phone, so you can call me, text me anytime. It's also got my work email there. Always happy to respond. So Matthew Richard LinkedIn profile there, and would love to connect.
And we'll add that in the show notes as well, so it's easy for people to find and connect. This has been another episode of Benefits Broker Boost. Make it a great day.